Hello. Oh my gosh. This is my first live, so I'm still getting used to it. There's a little timer that said it started, so that's promising. But hello, welcome to anyone that is able to be here live. Um, I am, of course, it'll be live, available afterwards. But welcome, I am Sheila, and today I'm going to be chatting about my Surly Bridge Club build because I got a lot of great questions about it. And I released the video about that build a couple weeks ago, and I got a lot of really great questions, and I promised a Q&A video, and then I went out on tour, and I've been on tour for the last week and a half. And so I haven't had much time to actually sit down and film and edit a video. So I thought going live would be a good way to kind of go through some of those questions and just chat with you today. So thank you for being here, and thank you to anyone watching this later. And I hope I'm able to answer everyone's questions. I wrote all of them out. I grouped them all. So if you are here with me live today, you can definitely toss any questions you have in the chat. And if I don't get to them right away, it's just because I already have them listed on questions that have been asked that I'm going to make sure to get to. So yeah, I'm going to try to get through everything. But just a little bit about me and where I am right now. I am in France. I just biked through Switzerland with my partner Michael for the last week. We went through the Alps. And I'm not on my Surly Bridge Club. I'm on my Grit 220 KHS Grit. And that's just because I managed to finish the Bridge Club a week before I left. And so I've previously gotten really excited about a new bike and headed out on the road. And I ended up kind of injuring my knees because I didn't kind of give enough time to warm up into it. So I decided to do the smart thing. And even though I really wanted to take my Surly, I took my Grit for this adventure. But the Surly will be going on a lot of upcoming adventures. So I think that's everything. I have little notes here to try to keep me on track. And if you're watching this afterwards, I am going to put time codes below the video. So if you want to hop forward to anything, you can totally do that. And I see a bunch of people popping in now too. So you can also leave your questions in the chat if you haven't already asked them. Or just, oh, that's a good question. Okay, I'm going to answer that. But I'm going to think that's going to be one of the last questions, because that's a good one, John. Thank you, John. Okay, so a lot of the questions were about the parts I picked, why and how and all of that. So I'm going to talk about the parts, and then I'll talk a bit about the build process. So to kick things off with the parts, if anyone's curious about doing a build, the biggest thing I discovered with each part was that you kind of end up doing this kind of risk reward assessment with each part. So with like whether it's the shifters or the brakes or whatever, you end up kind of debating the pros and cons of each part. And the three kind of like risk versus reward calculations I ended up doing were one, and this is no particular order, but one was the ability to find replacement parts or to find a shop or mechanics that can work with the parts. So the kind of ability for a part to be serviced and the ability for it to be replaced. That's kind of that's one of them. The second thing is the kind of ease of use and comfort and enjoyable nature of using a certain part. And then the third one is cost. And so I kind of did that analysis for every single part I picked. But the really important thing is that it's different for everybody. So everyone's going to make those kind of pro, con, risk assessments differently. And the parts I picked, it's not that they're, every part, like there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's all about kind of figuring out what's right for you. So what I picked, I'm very happy about and excited about, but it won't be right for everybody. So today I'm mostly just sharing how I made the choices I made, but they won't necessarily be right for you if you're looking to make a build. That's the magic of it. You get to kind of build the right bike for you. So I'll share kind of my thought process, and then you can kind of think through whether that feels true for you or not. Maybe you come to different pros and cons and choices. So yeah, this is just kind of like my opinions based on my experience and research. But everyone's going to be different. And I'm constantly learning too. So, okay. So the one big question I got for sure was the frame. How did I pick like this particular frame, the Surly Bridge Club frame? The biggest thing was that it was steel. I knew I wanted steel just because of its durability and the fact that it can be welded throughout the world. And so that makes it a lot easier to repair than aluminum or carbon. So that's why I knew I wanted steel. And so that drew me towards Surly bikes. And I picked the Bridge Club after looking at all the Surly options because of the Bridge Club's tire clearance. So with the Bridge Club, with a 27.5-inch wheel, you can do up to 2.8-inch tires with no fenders, or up to 2.6-inch with fenders. And I think I am going to be adding fenders. So up to 2.6, it was awesome. That's kind of the maximum I wanted because I've been really loving off-road riding. And so I wanted to make sure that I had that kind of level of tire clearance. And that actually brings me to another question I got asked a lot, which is why the Bridge Club from Surly over the Disc Trucker. The Disc Trucker is probably their best known touring bike. And it was actually my dream touring bike for a long time. Throughout the pandemic, when there was bike shortages, I really wanted either a Surly Disc Trucker or there's a Canadian company called Brody, and they make a Brody Elan. That's very similar. It's like drop bars and steel. And so I was really drawn to either one of those. But then over the last couple of years, I needed to switch to, butterfly trekking bars, which is what I have now. I had to switch away from drop bars because they were hurting. I had a wrist injury. So I knew I had to switch away from drop bars. And I started really loving off-road riding. And the Disc Trucker, the front fork measurement, maxes out with a 26-inch wheel, maxes out at, I think, 2 inches. I think the rear will get up to 2.1 inches, but in any case, it was just too narrow for the type of riding I wanted to do. The tires I have right now are the maximum this bike can do, and they're 48 Cs, and which is about 1.9 inches, I think. And that's not quite enough for some of the roads I like to go on and want to go on. So the Bridge Club is going to let me kind of move into that more off-roading category. So that's why I went with the Bridge Club. Even though I think the Disc Trucker is a really cool bike too. So that's the frame. Then we hop into wheels. Why 27.5 instead of 700s? I moved over to the 27.5s again for tire clearance. On this bike, I was going to Turkey and I wanted to do more like off-road riding. And so the 27.5s just make it a little bit smaller, that you can get a bit more tire in the clearance of the bike. And that's true for the Bridge Club as well. The Bridge Club, kind of interestingly, it at a 27.5 wheel can do, like I said, up to 2.8 inches without fenders, but only up to 47 millimeters with a 700C. So that's closer to like 1.9. So pretty significant in terms of like how much tire clearance you can get with like a 650 or a 27.5. So that was the big reason why I picked that. I find I just feel more comfortable on 27.5s or 60 or 650s. I feel like the bike just feels that tiny bit more compact. And just for where I sit on my saddle, I feel like I can put my foot down really comfortably, more comfortably than I can on a 700, even though it's not that big a difference. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I'm kind of converted to the 27.5s. I find it a really comfortable riding experience. And then there's the tire clearance. And anyone who's joining and asking questions, thank you so much for asking them. And I am going to get to them for sure. They are great. You know what? The tubeless tire question is probably good with the wheels. In this little category we're in right now. Yes, I have gone to tubeless tires. And I really like them. I actually made a video about about my tubeless setup and just tubeless tires in general, which I'll link below afterwards. But yes, I know tubeless is kind of intimidating, but I am really liking it so far. So I go through all the pros and cons in that video. So thank you for asking that, because I'll include that for sure. And then the next wheel question was Dynamo or no Dynamo. If anyone's not familiar with Dynamos, they're super cool. But basically, like, the hub creates like a power source. Like, as you bike, it like creates power that you can use to charge like a light or your phone. And I think that's so awesome. So it's very tempting. I think the biggest reason I decided against it is just that a big thing with my Surly build was that I wanted to make it as serviceable for me as possible. Like, I wanted to be able to work on it myself, and or to be able to have it easily serviced anywhere in the world. And I'm no Dynamo expert, so like anyone in the comments, feel free to weigh in if you've used a Dynamo. But my understanding is with the Dynamo, if you have issues, it typically has to be like sent back for service. Like, you have to ship it back for service. And in perhaps more remote parts of the world, it would be very hard for it to be serviced if it had issues. Now, from my understanding, aren't often issues with a good quality Dynamo, but if there are, then it's harder to service. So yeah, that's why I ended up deciding against it, mostly because I just wanted to be able to understand the inner workings of all my parts as best as I can, and the Dynamo is a little more intricate. But I do think it's really cool. But for my power setup right now, I have like an Anchor battery charger, which I can put a link in below afterwards as well. And it charges my phone 7 times. So that's like a week. And so that feels pretty substantial for me. I haven't had any issues with that. I know I might in like more remote parts of the world, but so far I haven't had any issues, and I'm going to be looking into solar options as well. But so that's my power source. And so that's why I decided to go that route over the Dynamo route. But time will tell. I think it's super cool. And so, yeah, I totally understand why people choose it. The hubs I did end up choosing are the DT Swiss 240s. I would have been perfectly happy with the DT Swiss 350s. They're less expensive, and the reason the 240s are more expensive is because they're lighter. But with all the weight I carry on my bike, the grams in my hubs are not making a difference. The reason I chose the 240s was simply that when I was building the wheels for my Turkey trip, I was on a tight timeline, and the 240s were the only ones that were available. So I kind of had to put in that extra money for the 240s, but I would have been perfectly happy with the 350s, I think. And the DT Swiss hubs in general, either of them, like my mechanic friends said that they're very serviceable. So that was my big draw towards them, for them being serviceable around the world. And then, okay, that takes us into Drivetrain. And I have so many questions about drivetrains. Um, let me see if any of the current questions are about drivetrains. No, okay. So if anyone does have any um, about the drivetrain I picked, definitely let me know because I already have a few. So one of the questions with the drivetrain was why no belt drive? Um, my reasoning was pretty similar to the Dynamo hubs in that I wanted to be able to repair it myself, and I I'm just kind of getting into that space where I feel comfortable working with a crank and chain and cassette, and so a belt drive would be a whole other technology, and I believe with the belt drive from my research. If it needs to be serviced, like people refer to it as bomb proof, like you shouldn't have any issues, they say. But if you do have an issue, from my understanding, you have to ship it back. And so that was a bit of a concern for me, is the fact that if something did go wrong, it wouldn't be super serviceable around the world, from my understanding. So that's why I decided against the belt drive. And then, of course, it is more expensive up front. That was a big deterrent for me too. But I'm seeing so many people loving belt drives, so I might change my tune one day and give that a try because it seems pretty cool. And then that brings me to the biggest decision I had to make, which was like 1x, 2x, or 3x. And I ended up going with the 2x10 Dior. And oh yeah, somebody has a question. Do you have gears up front? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I ended up going with the 2x10. It was a big decision. I thought about it for weeks. But the reason I ended up going with the 2x10 is if you're familiar with gear inches, I'll walk you through it in case anyone isn't. But so gear inches is basically how many inches the tire rolls for every kind of completion of a pedal stroke. So the lower the gear inches, that kind of helps you keep your feet moving up a steep climb. And the higher helps you keep going and pedaling on a flat without kind of spinning out. When you start to go downhill and your pedaling isn't doing anything anymore. So you can actually do the calculation yourself, which I find super interesting. If you search like gear inches calculator, you put in your wheel size and your tire size and your chain rings up front and the number of teeth on your cassette, and it'll calculate like what your range is. So with the 2x10 Dior, with like 27.5 wheels, which is what I have, and I put it in as 2.2 inches because I think that's around the usual tire that I'll run. I get from the lowest is 17 inches all the way up to 90. And that felt like a really good range for me. I was really excited about that. That kind of felt like the ideal range. And a 1x I couldn't find any option that had that range. And with the 3x, so that was why I ruled out 1x, was that the 2x had more range. And then with the 3x, my concern was more so on a day-to-day basis. Like a 3x8 or 3x9, I think is considered the kind of